Okay, we'll go ahead and get started while some people are still working on joining the call, just with introductions. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday. I'm Erin McCuskey from the Northwest Colorado Small Business Development Center. And what a beautiful day and week we have ahead. So I hope you can find a break from some of the current stressors to get out and safely enjoy the reasons that we've all chosen the Western Slope as our home. Some quick reminders: please use the Q&A to submit your questions. And the first question we always get is that, yes, this call is being recorded and it will be available on the Choose Colorado YouTube channel and also on the Northwest SBDC website. And we'll flash those links at the end of the call so that you can see them. Let's go to the next slide. I want to say a quick thank you to all of our partners for this call. You can see we've got a lot of them. Startup Colorado, Colorado's Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and Civic Canopy are all on the line with me today to help this call go smoothly. And we have many other partners across the state who are working on similar calls in other regions. Today we have some great panelists joining us for a business Q&A. We have Jessica Volland from the Northwest Workforce Area, who has some new data available to share that will be helpful for both employers and community leaders. We also have Nicole Christensen from Colorado Lending Source to help with common financing questions, and Randy Rudasic from the Yampa Valley Entrepreneurship Center at Colorado Mountain College, who also provides, as a part of that role, small business consulting services. So he'll be available to help address the topic of shifting business models and to answer any of those kind of common consulting questions. So I'll move to the panel and the Q&A at the end, but before we do that, we want to kick off today's call by acknowledging that our communities, our state, and indeed our whole country are really feeling some tension around this topic of reopening our economy. So we're going to kick off today's call with a 10-minute presentation from Joaquin Carson, who is the director of the Colorado State University Center for Public Deliberation. He is going to discuss the wicked problems theory and the need to manage divergent values and interests as we work to tackle this economy versus public health topic. So I'll turn it over to you to take it from there, Joaquin.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for having me on this call. As Erin said, my name is Joaquin Carson. I'm a communication studies professor at CSU. Basically, for the last 20 years, my research has focused on how do we talk about tough issues, and particularly looking at how, at least from a political perspective, how badly we talk about these issues and how many of the ways we engage kind of bring out the worst in us. So a lot of my work is how do you design processes and design conversations so you avoid kind of triggering those bad parts of our brains and actually help people bring out the best of us, which is that creative side, the collaborative kind of problem-solving nature of human nature. About 13 years ago, I started the CSU Center for Public Deliberation. It serves as an impartial resource, particularly for the Northern Colorado community. I train undergraduate students, and then we work with the city, with school districts, with community organizations to design and kind of host conversations based on these principles to kind of help us have the kind of conversations we need to know democracy has. So while I am a professor, most of my work is actually in the community as a practitioner designing work. Obviously, COVID is a huge kind of issue that we're all dealing with right now that really requires high quality communication. We have to be able to come together and talk about this issue in productive ways. And we got that a little bit at the beginning. It was kind of this common enemy that brought us together. And now you're seeing some of that kind of breakdown and some of the traditional kind of divisions and tribalism kind of coming out. So what I thought I would do for these 10 minutes is just kind of share one of the key tools that we use, particularly at the beginning of processes, to help spark better conversations and lay the groundwork for us to be able to kind of have these conversations. So if you go to the next slide. And it is this kind of concept of wicked problems, which some of y'all might be familiar with. A lot of the research on wicked problems talks about it as a category of problems, of different types of problems and what happens with wicked. That's pretty useful, but I tend to use wicked problems more as a lens through which to look at problems, a particular tool in your toolkit as you're trying to solve problems. So if you have an issue with that the communication is particularly problematic and people are talking past each other and distrust and so forth. How can you step back and say, well, if we look at this as a wicked problem, how does that change the conversation? How does that open up new possibilities for us to engage each other? So you can see on the slide that the primary kind of attribute of wicked problems that I use is this notion that they inherently involve competing underlying values and paradoxes that can't be solved by science. There's not a magic bullet. There's not a right answer that we're looking for. Wicked problems really require these ongoing conversations as we go. Let's go to the next slide. The best way to really think about the theoretical concept of wicked problems is playing with some different examples. So this is one example that we've been working with for quite a while. It's an actual slide from one of our projects probably about 7 or 8 years ago. Water is a wicked problem in northern Colorado because we don't get enough of it, right? It doesn't rain enough, at least on this side in the front slope, front range. And we're getting more and more kind of population coming in. We're learning more and more about the health of the river. So a lot of kind of competing values come up. So I designed these wicked problem slides for a lot of our projects of really trying to listen to the public discourse, listen to how people are arguing about issues, and how do we kind of identify those underlying values and kind of explicitly put them on the table to help us kind of see the complexity of the issue. Our brains crave certainty. Our brains crave simplicity. So how do we design processes to get away from that? So this slide in particular shows the wicked problem in 2 ways. One is if you look at these 9 boxes one at a time, they're all generally good things, right? The problem isn't bad people with bad values. The problem in a lot of ways is that there's lots of different values tied to issues, and the second key aspect of being a wicked problem is they don't fit together very well. Some do, but others, the more that you focus on that one box, the harder it will be to focus on the other boxes. So the kind of conversations we need to be having in our communities to deal with these issues is really about identifying those values, identifying the tensions, and working to kind of find better ways of negotiating them. But we don't tend to have those conversations naturally. What's much more natural, inherent to the way our brains work and the way a lot of our primary organizations and ways of engaging work, we tend to get 2 different kind of conversations. We either get the simple conversation of someone picking one value at a time and framing things as that's the most important one. So anyone that pushes back on that value is undermining a bad thing, undermining a good thing. Or we have a similar one where people kind of represent the motives of people. So you look at it, rather than economic vitality, they frame that as simple greed, right? And that's a lot of the conversations we're starting to get now is people strategically framing things as a simple good versus evil kind of tension in a way, which is great for our brains, but it's really bad for us actually trying to solve these shared problems together in our communities. So you can kind of see on the bottom of the slide the kind of conversations we really need to be sparking. Sometimes it's that tough prioritization conversation of how do we recognize all the values and realize right now some of these are more important than others. But even as we're prioritizing, recognizing the trade-offs, recognizing the values that we might not be putting at the top are still important, and how do we work to kind of mitigate those type of things. And on the son and the brother of small business owners, I certainly recognize small business owners are doing this all the time, right? That they don't have the luxury of framing things in strategic ways to win arguments. They have to solve problems. The second conversation of balancing, is more focused on how do we kind of get right in between all these. And then ideally we have the transcending conversation, which is a creative conversation of trying to find ways of switching things from being a tension, transcending the conversation, creating win-wins. Those 3 conversations are more difficult, but they're much more rewarding in the long term. But again, they don't happen naturally. So we have to be proactive to build the capacity and create those kind of conversations. The fact that you're being on this call shows that you're probably kind of already kind of situated to thinking about the importance of good communication as we deal with issues. So to go to the next slide, I have a few just other examples of wicked problems. This one actually I developed of your part of the state working with Extension at Steamboat Springs. That was really interested in building the local food economy there. So again, recognizing the tensions and finding ways to shift from kind of an adversarial perspective of picking one value at a time to a much more collaborative one of how do we work together to negotiate these tensions. The next slide, healthcare is a very complex issue in lots of different ways, but another way you can look at it is we want those 3 things, but those 3 things don't fit together very well. But most of our conversations tend to pick 1 or 2 at a time and frame it that way versus recognizing the inherent tension. The next slide, I work a lot with the city of Fort Collins, which is officially a triple bottom line city. They basically, any major policy going through Fort Collins has to go through the lens of what's the impact on people, what's the impact on the economy, and what's the impact on the environment. And they recognize it essentially as a wicked problem, that those three things on their own are great one at a time, but they don't necessarily fit together. But how can we create, spark creativity to help balance those and transcend those tensions? I like showing this slide in particular because the traditional tension between environment and the economy is a more adversarial relationship. But when you look at something like green jobs, right, it created a transcendent thing that we're creating jobs, we're creating wealth in ways that's good for the environment. We're taking people that used to see themselves as enemies as collaborators, and that sparks much better actions kind of moving forward. The next slide, if you look at the preamble of the Constitution, my argument here is more broad in the sense that democracy itself is a wicked problem, right? The next slide shows that embedded in the preamble of the Constitution are some key American values. The next slide, kind of, if we translate those slides into more modern kind of language, you see these 5 big American values of justice and security, equality, and freedom. And these are wicked problems, right? Because again, taking them one at a time, they're universally supported. Everyone on this call prefers justice to injustice, right? But if I asked you to rank these, we would get very different rankings as we kind of go through, right? The next slide shows an exercise I often do in my classroom or when we're giving presentations that we ask people on the clickers, like, which of these are most important to you? And this is a very kind of typical response I get that, it ranges across all of them, right? And I make the point with this that in many ways we all have the same values. What makes us different is how we rank those values, right? And those rankings kind of have importance because issues, again, cut across these. So go ahead and switch to the next slide and then go ahead and go to the next one too. So the heart of the work that we do from Wicked Problems is instead of taking the easy route of framing things simply as one value or misrepresenting the motives of the other side as having a negative value, we want to identify those values and identify that tension and kind of bring that out. So just looking at those 5 big American values, there's inherent tensions there that we're always going to have to be negotiating, right? If you think about what value you would have picked as most important, I imagine if you think about it, you could also recognize that value might be too powerful, right? That it would dominate too much, right? So we always have to recognize that values have to be seen in kind of conjunction with each other. The bottom of the screen shows other tensions that kind of inherently come up with a lot of projects that we have. So the next slide is the last slide. It's starting to kind of, or one more, starting the process to really think about COVID and our response to COVID as a wicked problem, right? Like I've been talking about, it's a healthcare issue, it's a mental issue, it's certainly an economic, kind of these 3 crises together. As we start thinking about all the values that kind of play into us dealing with this, how do we kind of create conversations and think about working together to kind of negotiate these rather than taking a simple route of just picking one at a time to framing things that might win arguments and make you feel better, right? But doesn't help us working together to deal with these shared problems. So with that quick introduction, I'll pass it back to Erin for the conversation.
Thank you, Martin. I have a feeling that's a topic that is going to continue for us for months, maybe even years to come as we work through just how to shift and how to collaborate in new and different ways. So I look forward to hearing from you again in the near future.
Thanks.
From there, we're gonna switch over to the business panel. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we have 3 experts with us today who are each going to provide a brief introduction of kind of what they're seeing or hearing within their areas of expertise. And then following that, we will open it up to Q&A. So we'll kick off with Nicole Christensen with the Colorado Lending Source, who is going to give us some general financing and lending updates. Go to the next slide, and I'll hand it over to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you for hosting these and continuing to bring resources to the group. For those of you who are attending, I hope you're doing well considering. My name is Nicole Christensen. I'm with Colorado Lending Source. We're a private nonprofit lender to small businesses, as well as a resource around small business funding and entrepreneurship. So I'm going to spend a bit of time just talking about kind of where we are in the midst of the funding for the crisis, and then starting to move us all past, this current situation to where do we go from here? What could that look like for businesses and for funding? So a few highlights I wanted to share. The Paycheck Protection Program is still available. They're termed groans because they're a grant and loan hybrid, and I think that's a creative name, so that's why I shared that name here. The exciting thing is the second round of funding that came out includes lenders like ourselves, so Colorado Lending Sources offering these PPP loans, as well as some other private nonprofit lenders in the state of Colorado. So if you've been unable to secure one of those loans, there are still options until the funding runs out, of course, but please let me know after this if I can connect you with our pool of funds or another lender. I will say that this morning we're hearing a lot of the folks working with the larger lenders are finding out they have their approval. So for example, Chase Bank, I think, submitted a bunch of these loans on Monday, and they're just now getting to all their applicants with their approval numbers. So that's been interesting to see that continue to evolve. So if you have an application still in process, it might be worth checking again today to see if there's any updates. The next thing to talk about is this idea of taking on debt while the revenue for your business is decreasing, and for how long is it going to be down? Of course, if we knew, we would all be better for it. But I think it's the time to create your projections. So your revenue projections that you had when you first started your business, if you don't do that on a regular basis, I think now is a time to do those again. So taking what you know about these safer at home phases and putting your revenue and expenses month by month through the end of 2020, what does that look like? For example, we're hearing that through the end of the year, the largest gathering possible is probably going to be 250 people. So if your business depends on, large farmers markets every week, big events on the weekends, it's time to look at what your revenue and expenses more likely will be. And perhaps it's the best case, worst case, and then some sort of middle ground scenario. And the Small Business Development Center can help you look at those numbers, help you talk through those assumptions, as well as your lender might be able to talk through those as well. So I really make that recommendation to those small businesses to create their revenue projections kind of for where we're at. And at least we know more this week than we did a week ago about these next phases. The banking relationship you have, if you don't already know, is really key. It's going to continue to be key to navigating this current situation as well as into the future, how you're pivoting your business. You're going to need a lender potentially to help you with that, and they're going to want to know what you're doing and help you through that. So definitely something to keep in mind. I see going forward that SBA loan guarantees and other alternative financing is going to really be even more important than it's been. Our banks just have done a whole bunch of PPP loans, and things are changing. The economy isn't as strong. They might be changing their lending limits and appetite for loans. So the reason that the SBA loan guarantees exist is to help shore up risk for banks. So I truly think that'll continue to be more important, which means, as a small business owner, you're going to need to know more about SBA loans, about alternative financing options. So that'll continue to fall on you as business owners. I wanted to mention this website, smallbizlending.org. It was created by the banks in Colorado to help businesses know what to expect when you apply for a loan, the different terms you're going to hear when you apply for a loan, the process. I checked it again recently. It's really a good resource, so I've started to share it again and wanted to share it with you folks today. Next slide. A few other things that to me will probably be more important going forward, as maybe you're planning to run your business differently and maybe you need funding to retrofit something, to change your operations, to pivot somehow. Once you know your revenue is going to continue to be at a certain place, the key to having a loan is that you have the ability to repay that. And for yourselves, it's not a good idea to take on debt that you're not sure you can repay. That's why that PPP loan is so unique, because a large portion of it's forgiven, and then it's a 1% interest rate after that. It's really the only scenario you can borrow money at under these current, strict conditions. So going forward, when you're planning to be able to make a certain amount of revenue and you need to do something within your business to get to that level, it could make sense to borrow money. And along with the SBA loans that we talked about, Kiva and other crowdfunding platforms could be helpful for you. This idea that if you own a coffee shop that's the community favorite and you need to do things differently to continue operating and serving your clients, look to your clients to help you fundraise. So Kiva is a really great platform. We actually run a program through Colorado Lending Source under Kiva, where part of it is raised locally with private funding from the people that really want to see that business stay around. They use PayPal for no fee, so it's a very secure and private way to give money to a business that you want to help with their crowdfunding raise. And then after the business raises a certain amount through the private Kiva fundraising, it's opened up to a public crowdfunding platform. And Colorado hasn't had Kiva for very long, so almost every Colorado-based business that shows up on the Kiva public platform has been getting funding lately. There are people that love Colorado. They love to see small business continue in Colorado. They have money, and these are relatively small loans. And so once they hit the public platform, the businesses that we're working with have been able to secure the rest of their funding within a day. So the total Kiva process is about 2 weeks. I can send you a bit more information about it, but it's that idea of asking other people for money. It's not comfortable, but our wonderful small communities, our businesses are a cornerstone to these communities. So you're going to have to get comfortable asking for money from people that want to see you stick around. The next few things I'll mention is the fact that towns and counties and municipalities, they're all coming out with their different programs. So keep an ear to the ground on your specific community and what people might be doing. There's a group of folks that are trying to get money out to businesses now to kind of bridge the gap. And then I think there's another wave of folks looking, what do businesses need going forward? The good news out of any of this, I guess, if there is good news, is there's a lot more funding options than there ever has been before. And a lot of them are very unique to the community that you're in. So keep an eye out for that. On that same line is the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. They have their exhaustive list of grants and funding, and some of it is very specific, but something to scroll through and make sure there's not an option for funding under that. And then finally, sorry, that slide got a little cut off, but we have a rural emergency loan fund that we see as key to helping businesses retrofit and retool. So the terms are on the bottom of that slide. It's up to $10,000, 3.75% interest rate, 2-year term, and for 6 months, you will not have any payments. This would be any business in this area that we're working with right now would be eligible. I think Grand Junction is the only large community that this would not apply to on the western slope. So with that, next slide is my contact information, and I'll be ready to answer questions in a bit.
Thank you, Nicole. That information is so valuable. I think that funding continues to be the top question that we get from small business owners. So want to encourage everyone to look at options outside of just those SBA funding sources, because there are plenty of resources for you. So thank you, Nicole. Keeping along those lines, I'm going to turn it over to Randy Rudasik now from the Yampa Valley Entrepreneurship Center, which is a part of Colorado Mountain College and Steamboat. Randy is a small business consultant as well, and so he can speak on a variety of topics and can also help answer questions on a variety of topics. So I'm going to turn it over to him to do an introduction, and then he'll be available for questions at the end of the call.
Hi, thanks for taking me today. I appreciate it. A few things you might want to think about as you're fighting through this big challenge is to defend. Cash is king. Protect what you can. Negotiate with your landlord. Many credit card companies are allowing you to defer payments for a period of time. There's a a lot of options for employees, which Jessica will talk later, for unemployment. So you shouldn't feel as bad if you need to cut some things back in terms of labor. Number two, hustle. Find alternative revenue sources. Promote your business, keep it active, but think about delivery. Think about curbside pickup, which is where Steamboat's evolving to starting today. Think about establishing delivery partners in your community, or deliver yourself if you need to. There's a lot of different ways to do this. We need new point of sale systems so that we don't have to touch credit cards. Safety is a critical issue. So PayPal is cheap, but it's not cheap, but it gets the job done. Toast Now is a great, friendly restaurant application software product, so you can take payments online for your delivery or curbside pickup stuff. So fight for revenue every way you can. Evaluate your product mix. Many restaurants have added groceries to their model because people can't get all the things they want through the grocery store, and it's also convenient. Is there anything you can sell to move up on the list of your customer needs? Outdoor retailers, are you selling sports-oriented masks and buffs? Can you give one free with a $100 purchase? There's a lot of creative options out there for things we can do to keep our customers engaged and knocking on our door. Refresh your web and social media presence. Adapt. Learn how to use tools maybe you didn't want to or kind of afraid of. It's okay. You'll get through it. There's people to help you talk through some of these software application tools as well. We want to offer your customers webinars and video content on the products and services you have in your store. Show them how to do a few things themselves, since you can't get out and help them right now. Do all you can to keep them engaged, and maybe show some nice pictures and some fun as well. Has your website pivoted yet to the new business model, and are you incorporating safety into all your messaging on behalf of your customers? Take some time to learn new skills. A lot of stuff out there, great webinars are being posted, including by Colorado Mountain College. We're doing free education this summer for credit and not for credit programs in many areas. Many of those have filled up, but we'll be bringing more out in the coming weeks. Finally, talk to somebody. This is a lonely path. You want to share and get advice and discuss the ways you're going to pivot and figure out ways to deal with things constructively, alleviate your concerns, or try to find some kind of consensus in what you want to go forward. So feel free to ask the Northwest SBDC for help, or go to the CMC's website and click on business support, and that your inquiry will come to me, and I'll get it farmed out to one of 36 different counselors we have connected with across Western Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. You close that up perfectly, because you are a wealth of knowledge, and it's a great pitch for how we have so many valuable but free consulting services available to business owners in our region right now. There's many more even beyond just CMC and the SBDC, but reach out to any of us, and we can also help connect you to other resources if we aren't the right fit. From there, I'll turn it over to Jessica Volland with the Northwest Workforce Area. And as we've all kind of teed up, there's some great new data to share this week, so I'm going to turn it right over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Erin. Can you hear me all right? Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. You made it to May, although as one of my staff said this morning, we should rename it Meh instead of May. I know that a lot of our communities are kind of easing into this reopening phase, and there's a lot of excitement around that, some nerves for sure. And I think, you know, to Nicole's point and Randy's point, just a lot of uncertainty about what things are going to look like going forward and how do you navigate your business through that process. I do have some data that I think it's really important that, you know, as Nicole talked about, doing some planning, especially thinking through the rest of 2020 on what your business can sustain with reduced crowd sizes or other indicators. And I have some data that I think will be helpful in contemplating what the road forward looks like for your business. So we'll go ahead and dive in. Next slide, please, Emily. So what I wanted to give you first is a sense of how many people have claimed unemployment in your local area. I oversee a 10-county region. You can see the map up there. I know that's not necessarily an exact overlay to folks on the call, but you know what this map is showing you, and then our bar chart is the percentage of the civilian labor force, so the people in your county that are part of the labor force, what percent of them have filed for unemployment, and this is through the week that ended in April 11th. So early March through April 11th, about a month total. The data for us at a county level lags a little bit. It's about, at this point, almost 3 weeks old, but it's the most current thing that we have. And you can see here, Colorado is all the way on the far right-hand side. For the same time period, about 8% of the workforce in Colorado had claimed unemployment. You can see in some of our counties, like here in Pitkin County, Eagle County, that number is almost double or more the state average in terms of the percentage of the workforce that have filed for unemployment assistance. So the ones that I've highlighted down here in yellow, Eagle, Grand, Lake, Pitkin, Routt, and Summit counties, you might already be appreciating that all of these communities have something in common, which is a very predominant resort presence. They're home to at least one, if not multiple, ski mountains. So not surprisingly, when we look a little bit more at the data on who's being most impacted, those resort and tourism-oriented economies were hit the hardest. Because this data is a few weeks old, we know that this number has only gone up from this point in time. So it will continue to climb. The peak of claims being filed has passed in terms of that, initial onslaught of applicants. But we're continuing to receive people filing for unemployment every week in very significant numbers. So just a little bit of perspective here on what this looks like thus far in our community. I do just want to caveat real quick, this is not the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is derived from a survey, and this isn't that. So if, please don't hear this and say, oh, Pitkin County's unemployment rate is 18%. That's not an accurate representation. So what this is showing you is the percentage of people who are working that have filed a claim for unemployment. Next slide, please. Okay, so I know that this is a lot of colors, a lot to wrap your mind around. What this is representing is where people work in these respective counties. And I want you to pay a lot of attention to that pink bar. So any place where we see a large percentage of the workforce is engaged in leisure and hospitality, that corresponds to those counties that I just showed you that have, getting close to double the state's average unemployment filing claims. So again, here, Grand County and Routt County for us as part of our Northwest workforce area, really heavily dominated by leisure and hospitality workers. And we know that the impacts there are really significant. And also education and health. We've seen a fairly large number of layoffs in the health industry, as any type of elective procedures have really kind of been taken off the docket for some time. Hopefully, as our healthcare institutions start bringing those back on, we'll see people returning to healthcare, but there have been a lot of layoffs there too. Next slide. So this is the same picture for the rural resort counties. And again, paying attention to the pink bar, Eagle County, Pitkin County, and Summit County. In some cases, close to 50% or more of the workforce is engaged in leisure and hospitality. So that is really the correlation that we're looking for in between, where are layoffs, where have they been the worst, are in communities that are tourism dominated. I want to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So next slide. So again, you can see the spike here in initial claims by industry. Overwhelmingly, it's the leisure and hospitality workers that have been let go thus far. So just different ways of looking at similar data, but hopefully I think we're all getting the point here that industries and economies that are heavily immersed in tourism have suffered disproportionately and probably will continue to suffer disproportionately going forward. So I think that's really important for our resort heavy communities as we start thinking about pivoting towards recovery. As you all know, as business owners, it's not just a matter of, do I open my doors, but will I have enough demand to justify the cost of my doors being open? So next slide. Okay, so this is a base industry perspective, and a base industry is basically anything that brings money, revenue into your local economy. So you can see here that for the county that we're looking at, tourism is roughly 60% of the base industry for Eagle County. So that's really significant, right? 60% of the dollars that come into Eagle County are coming through tourists. Regional services here, in case you're wondering, that includes healthcare, construction, wholesale, retail trade, financial services, education is also thrown in there. Other income is dividends, interest, and rent. for people under the age of 60, so people that are earning dividends off of stocks or investments. Retirees is the spending of anybody over the age of 60. So when we look at Eagle County, if this is where your business is located, and we know that a full 60% of the revenue that comes into the community in a year is tourism dependent, I think Nicole's point is really important. You know, we've been hearing that max gathering size going through the rest of this year might cap out at 250 people. What is that going to mean for an economy that's deriving 60% of its revenue from tourism? I know that that's not a pretty picture for anyone, but the data is really important, I think, in order to try and make the most informed plan to move forward as you possibly can. I do have all 10 counties in here. I don't want to go through every single one of them because I think that would be a little brain damaging, but we'll look very quickly, and then the slide deck will be available on the SBDC website. Emily, you want to go to the next slide? So Garfield County is a great contrast to Eagle County. You can see that there's lots of, this looks more like a Trivial Pursuit pie. There are lots of different pieces of pie, and no one of them is more than a third. In the world of economic development, it's ideal to not have more than a third of your base industry profile derived from one industry. So Garfield County, in comparison to Eagle County, in a very different position when it comes to recovery, right? Because the revenue that they're pulling in comes from a diversity of sources, unlike some of our resort-heavy communities. Next slide. Grand County, same as Eagle County, tourism-heavy. Next slide. Jackson County looking a little bit more like Garfield County, better mix here. Next slide. Lake County, also a good Trivial Pursuit pie, a good diversity here in terms of revenue that comes into Lake County. Commuter, I just want to explain here, that's money that people make elsewhere, that they then come home, in this case to Lake County, and spend their money locally, but they're earning their wages outside of the community. Next slide. Moffat County, again, a lot more diverse. Next slide. Pitkin County, same as Eagle, same as Grand, almost 60% coming from tourism. A larger chunk here coming in investment income, almost 20% is coming from dividends, interest, and rent earning for Pitkin County residents. Next slide. Rio Blanco, nice even distribution. Next slide. Routt County, tourism heavy, but not quite as much as we would see in Summit and Pitkin and Eagle counties. Next slide. Summit County is the most extreme. Almost 70% of the base industry in Summit County is being derived from tourism. So an overwhelming majority of revenue in the county is dependent upon the ability of people to travel freely and recreate in large groups in the county. So knowing that that in all likelihood is going to be off the table, or certainly reduced to a scale that we've never seen it before, we know that these counties are going to, the ones that are tourism heavy, we've seen it already. They were hit harder to begin with, and the recovery is going to take longer in these communities until tourism is able to rebound to the degree that we are used to. Even if tourism came back at 50% of the level of what we're used to in these communities, it would still be a huge percentage of the revenue that the community isn't going to see. Next slide. So these are just some important considerations, and I think that it ties in nicely with what Nicole's recommendations were for you as business owners, depending on where your business is located. Knowing how much your local economy depends upon tourism is going to be critically important in planning, right? Because our communities without tourists are not large enough to drive enough demand for every business to continue to operate in the way that it did before. You know, we all know that we're dependent upon other people being able to come here and spend. Think about what type of opportunities there are to increase revenue through those economic drivers that are not dependent upon travel or crowds as an area of opportunity. I think for local elected officials and community leaders, it's also really important to be tuned into what kind of public services are receiving most of their funding from taxes on those tourism dependent activities. We know that those services are going to take a considerable hit, and I think in most of our communities, we've already started to see the impacts of that. Something that is important to understand is that the federal stopgaps right now, you know, barring any future pending legislation, they all kind of drop off in June or July. I think that we can very reasonably say that our local economies will not be anywhere near recovered by June or July. So thinking about what is the local plan for managing this kind of impending cliff of federal aid, and or advocating with our congressional delegation for continued aid for economies that don't have any chance of bouncing back by the time that the current funding is going to dry up. And then the thing that like I said, I've got a 10-county region, a lot of resort communities. I live in a resort community, and I hear a lot of people talking kind of tentatively about, well, it's probably going to be a little bit of a reduced summer. I think that we're deluding ourselves if we don't also start to really robustly anticipate significant reductions to winter travel as well. So start planning now for a long haul, not just we're just going to make it to June. I think that it's important, and the data certainly indicates that it's going to be quite a while until our economies are able to sufficiently rebound really until tourism is able to come back. So I will leave it at that and turn it back over to Erin.
Thank you, Jessica. We are kind of short on time for Q&A, but we're going to get through just a couple quick questions. Jessica has been doing a great job, as have all of our panelists, answering the questions in the chat. So please continue to use that function. We have to wrap up in 5 minutes so that they can start the next regional call on this platform. So really quick, Jessica kind of summed it up quickly, and I want to start with Randy, who had given a great list of things that business owners can be considering. But Randy, out of that list, what do you think is the most important action that a business owner can take at this moment?
My personal opinion is they need to pivot. They need to change direction a bit. We need to rebuild your business almost from the ground up to think about different ways to bring revenue in. There's only so much expenses you can cut or defer. And as we previously mentioned, some of these federal funding programs will run out in time. So I'd be looking to my community for support. I really love the Kiva idea, and I'll pass that on throughout the Steamboat here next week. But I think we need to find different ways to connect with customers. And that means online, it means delivery, it means aggressive marketing of safety. We've had some cool ideas in our community about opening up parks and putting tables in there and having food delivered to the park so people can sit, 15 feet apart in tables and have a social experience without getting close. And I don't know what the end line is, but I do think we need to really adapt in terms of our products and services on a unique, different level. One thing we didn't talk about a whole lot was second homeowners. I suspect they're part of the tourist economy, but if they come back and we allow them back, and that's going to help our economies quite a bit. Many of them have resources, can order food out, can buy some retail. I believe that could be that base increase just to keep a few businesses from struggling too badly.
Thank you, Randy. And then we never have enough time, so I'm going to wrap it up with a question for Nicole. Nicole, many business owners, as you know, are waiting to find out if they have been approved for the EIDL, and they're waiting to find out how much money that's going to be. So in the meantime, we've heard from people who are looking for other loan options. They're reaching out to their bank, and they're finding out that bank won't give them a loan, or maybe is hesitant to give them a loan if it's a loan for the COVID impact. So I was wondering if you could just comment on that, and if you have any suggestions about what types of loans people could look at, if any.
Yeah, thank you. I do think if you're not already in the EIDL queue, there's no money there, and I don't know that everyone in the queue will even get funding, so that's unfortunate. I just think the demand was way more than they could have ever anticipated. So I do think this idea of crowdfunding comes to mind as an option. It's not necessarily crisis money, but it's helping you continue in a different way with a different business model. Also, I think I learned about this 2 weeks ago on this call, but this idea of selling gift cards now and getting the cash now and then offering the services later. There's a cool app for that called Honeycomb. I don't know much else about it, but it's this way that clients sign up for gift cards from their favorite businesses, and then they actually get to spend a little more than 100% of that down the road. So this idea of buying it for $100 now and getting $120 in the future could be another way to raise some cash now for being around in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. So we're going to wrap up. I'll have you go to the next slide. Just a reminder that you can find this presentation and download all of the slides at the screens that are available. The Northwest SBDC website, as well as the Startup Colorado website, will have these presentations. The Choose Colorado website, YouTube channel, will have the presentations available from all 4 quadrants of the state. There's also some tremendous business resources available. Sorry, some of those are duplicative. So check out those links that are on your screen right now. And next slide. There we go. There's the information about the Choose Colorado YouTube channel, so you can check out all of the recordings there as well. We'll see you back here next week. Appreciate all of your time. Thank you.